First of all, there are more than 30 million of us Ghanaians in this country. That's a fact that we all know. Now, of this 30 million people, more than 30 million people, none of us is divine. And it doesn't matter whether they are chiefs, presidents, ministers, or whatever. Nobody is divine. Everybody's view has the same value as another. And we should not get into the realm when we start to describe some of our citizens as having divine wisdom or being divine and so on. That's the beginning of some of the problems we encounter in the administration of this country. Nobody is divine. Nobody has divine wisdom. Now, having said that, I think it's also extremely important to make the point that levies and taxes are unpleasant. Indeed, nowhere on this planet have any people embraced levies and taxes with dancing and drumming or drumming and dancing. Levies and taxes are necessarily unpleasant. Okay? Even though it is a fact that sometimes levies and taxes are imposed in order to generate resources to resolve some of the concrete problems that face our people, they are always rejected. They are fought against. And any government which is introducing levies and taxes must be aware of this fact. That's number two. Number three, it does appear to me that there's been some sloppiness, extreme sloppiness in the announcement and implementation of the so-called 1 cedi levy. You see, we came here this morning and I have been educated by some of the things that other panelists have said. Dr. Kobra Donko, who has been minister of the sector before, you understand, and who is regarded in this country as an expert in the field, has told us that this levy is not new. And I'm not going to challenge, but I don't know. But he insists that this levy is not new. And that indeed the levy has always been there. And until this introduction in Parliament last week by Atoforsen, the levy was 95 pesos. Is that true? Now, if that is true, it means that what is being added is not 1 cedi, but 5 pesos or 50 pesos.
So it's increased by 1 cedi.
What is being added? 95. So 5 pesos more.
No.
It's 195 now.
So it's being increased by 1 cedi.
So let us understand it. It was 95
pesos.
Please, let us understand it. According to Dr. Kwabena Deronko, it was 95 pesos.
Yeah.
We have added 1 cedi more.
Yes.
So it is 195. I didn't understand it that way. But then the fact is that it has always existed, or for some time it has existed. It has been increased by 1 cedi. That's education for me. Because I didn't know that before I came into the studio. And I read the newspapers religiously every morning. So if I didn't know, how many other people didn't know? How many other people were as ignorant as I am? There must be some reason, some act of commission or some act of omission which allowed this ignorance of mine to persist. You understand? And we need to look for that reason. Now, this morning when I came into the studio, and I've learned a lot this morning, one of the things that I learned was that Sena, who is hosting this program, who is the anchor for Radio Go's morning show, heard about this imposition as a surprise. I can't believe it. Which government does that? Which government does that? Because if you're going to introduce such a measure, which you can anticipate will be controversial and so on, what preparation went into the announcement which excluded people like Sena from knowing that something like this was going to happen? That's a problem. You understand? Now, let me say that the fact that this was sprung on us as a surprise is itself a major problem. You see, in political communication, there's something which has come to be known as flying the kite. Used everywhere. It is used everywhere in the world, flying the kite. Now, what does that mean? We are going to announce a measure. We are not sure what public reaction is going to be and so on. So you find a way of dropping the measure in the public domain in order to gauge public reaction. And from the public reaction, you then shape the policy or measure in such a way as to make for broader public acceptance. In this case, no kite was flown. It hits everybody like a jolt from somewhere. You understand what I'm saying? So that itself is a problem. Now, power supply is a major headache in Ghana, has been a major headache in Ghana for a very long time. It has a potential of slowing down the ability of government to generate employment, or limiting the ability of government to generate employment. It has the potential of closing down industry. It can affect healthcare delivery. It can affect education. It can affect national infrastructural development. Indeed, it can affect every aspect of the national life. So power generation, power supply is extremely important. You understand? It affects everything. It affects food prices. It affects transport prices and so on. So if you're going to take any measure on power supply, it's important to involve major sections of our society, or indeed, if it is possible, all sections of our society in the discussion of that measure. Of course, if you take this route, it will slow down the speed of implementation. It may delay implementation and so on. But ultimately, it's a better choice. Okay. But somehow, government decided that this should come as a surprise. And I remember the morning in Parliament, I was watching parliamentary procedure, and the minority was insisting that we need to know what is contained in this measure which is going to be announced by the minister. And there was a debate, long debate about whether it should be disclosed ahead or not disclosed ahead and so on. So deliberately, government had decided that this is a secret which should be sprung on the people. Why? Why was it a secret? Now, because it was sprung on the people as a surprise, even government communicators were confused. They didn't know how to communicate. And that is why communication appeared to be so poor, because there had been no preparation. Before this measure was announced, I would have thought that apart from consulting broad sections of our community, flying a kite and so on, the communicators themselves should have been meeting over a period, discussing the consequences, anticipating questions which will be asked and so on. Nothing like that appeared to have been done. What was the end result? The end result is that this measure is announced. And then government communicators come and say, oh, don't worry. As for us in government, we are ready to sacrifice one CD in order to resolve a major problem that confronts us. And that annoyed the population. I know sympathizers of the government who were angry. I can mention one. This guy, Mawuli Dake, is it? I think so, Mawuli Dake, who has been defending government constantly and so on. That day, he flipped and wrote a very damning Facebook post. And he said, why? Because those who were telling us that they are ready to sacrifice one cedi in the national interest, everybody knows that they don't buy petrol. And someone said, everybody knows that they don't buy petrol. So if their method of communication, if their message, if their communication is that we are ready to sacrifice one cedi and so on, people take that for an insult. And part of the reason why this happened was lack of preparation. You know, it was lack of preparation of the communications team or teams of government to deal with this situation. It created a huge problem for us. Now, I'm in full sympathy with what my colleague, Mr. Apia Dankwa, has said. This country has a problem. And what is the problem we have? From what the experts are telling us, it is clear that the energy sector is indebted to the tune of between 3.1 and 3.7 billion dollars. That's the debt. I've heard 3.1, I've heard 3.7, some even put it higher. That is the debt that the energy sector or the power sector has accumulated over the years. Now, it is important to note that if you take all of the IMF loans that were granted as a result of our last recourse to IMF and so on, you cannot pay the power sector debt. Because that whole loan is 3 billion. The debt is 3.1 or 3.7. So if you take all of that loan and you give it to the power sector, we will still be in debt in that sector. You understand? Now, what has been done in order to retire that level of indebtedness? And I recall President Kufuor. When President Kufuor assumed office, the debt was there and it was growing. So President Kufuor's government introduced what came to be known as the third debt recovery levy. That third debt recovery levy which President Kufuor's government introduced is not substantially different from this levy which is being imposed now. And over the years, we have had one levy or the other from that time with the intention of using what accumulates from the imposition of that levy to retire the debt. Indeed, under the first government of President Mahama, the ESNA debt was introduced. The objective of that was to raise resources in order to free the energy sector from its heavy indebtedness. And things were happening well until the new patriotic party government led by Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo came into office. And they decided that retiring the power sector debt was not the priority. That their priority was to develop the capacity for borrowing more. For what? So they used the monies which had accumulated from the imposition of the energy sector levy as collateral for getting loans, more loans. Just, and everybody knows what loans have done to the national economy. You understand? So they created a problem. Okay? They created a huge problem. Now today, the debt keeps ballooning. At the same time, consumers of electricity are saying that the cost of electricity is too high. Industry is saying so. Even domestic consumers are saying so, and so on. So it would appear to me that increasing tariffs, electricity tariffs, may not be a preferred solution given what the public sentiment is. Now, if increasing electricity tariffs cannot be the solution, then what can be the solution? This is where we are. The Mahama government thinks that they can impose a levy of 1 cedi. Now we have been told that it's 1 cedi, okay? And that can generate resources which would enable them to retire the debt and keep electricity prices reasonable for industry, for domestic consumers, and for everybody. You understand? That is what they have decided to do. The minority in parliament quickly says that no, that this is bad. This is not the promise that the Mahama administration made, and so on. Okay, we agree. No problem, we agree. What is the alternative? What have they said is the workable alternative? If the imposition of the levies is bad, what is good? They should tell us. As I sit here, I haven't heard any alternative from the minority. None whatsoever. And it's important also to understand that it is this same minority that sat in parliament and agreed that the monies which had accumulated or were accumulating in order to deal with this problem should be used as a collateral in getting loans. What an irresponsible minority. I mean, they are so irresponsible, it's unbelievable. So irresponsible. Because if you think that these measures are bad, it is not good for the economy, it is going to hurt people and so on, where is your alternative? How should we raise the necessary funds to retire the energy sector debt? Look, let us admit, the imposition of this levy comes with many difficulties. One of the difficulties is that we have put a lot of pressure on commercial transport operators to reduce their fares on the assumption that petroleum pricing had dropped to a certain level. Okay? What is the impact of this imposition of an extra 1 cedi levy on petroleum products? Are we going to ask commercial drivers now to review their fares? And if we are not going to ask commercial drivers now to review their fares, what are we going to do? And you see, President John Dramani Mahama said something, I think I even found it this morning in one of the newspapers, that he expects the cedi to eventually stabilize at between 10 and 12 cedis to $1. What does that tell us? What that tells us is that the president knows that the drop in the value of the cedi would not be constant, and that at a certain point it will start rising again. That's clear. But beyond what the president says is the Bank of Ghana. The Bank of Ghana has told us that by the close of the year, the value of the cedi will be around 11 cedis to $1. That's the Bank of Ghana, which is another indication that the cedi will rise again. Other agencies are actually predicting that we are going to end the year with the cedi to dollar ratio at 14 to 1, which is another indication that it's going to rise again. Okay. Now, if you look at the bill which was sent to Parliament, there is no sunset clause. No sunset clause. Which means that even if all these predictions are wrong, and the cedi rises all the way beyond 14 and so on, there will still be this imposition of a 1 cedi levy. What does that mean for the consumer and so on? Now, Sena, you would remember because you hosted that program here. I was making the point that I am in opposition to this market economy that we are trying to run. It doesn't make sense. Ultimately, it leads to hardship for the people. It leads to taking control away from central government to other peripheral institutions and so on. But you see, if you say you are running a market economy, what it means is that the laws of demand and supply and so on determine prices. Prices are not decided on the basis of control, central control and so on. So yes, everybody in Ghana can see that the cedi is appreciated in value. Everybody can see that. Everybody can see the good things that are happening in the economy and so on. If you're running the kind of economy that you want to run and so on, leave things to take their natural course. You understand? But some of our friends in government, they have their own ideas. They want to quickly jump in and take credit for everything, and forget that what they are taking credit for can change because of the operation of market forces and so on. Now, that is bad in communications. You don't take credit for something which is beyond your capacity and so on. And they haven't learned that, and they have continued. These oil marketing companies have issued a statement, very interesting statement. What are the oil marketing companies saying? They're saying that, look, the price of petroleum products can rise again. Given the understanding of the operation of the economy, the price of petroleum products can rise again. Okay? How is that factored into government policy? So that 6 months from now, people don't turn around and accuse government of lying or betraying them. How honest can we be with the Ghanaian public and stop this useless spinning all the time, spinning? We should stop spinning and face the reality. The spinning is too much. And the spinning ultimately will be very, very harmful to government. Let's deal with reality. Now, so many suggestions are being made about how to deal with our power problems and so on. Listen to many. There is an emphasis on green energy. There's an emphasis on all kinds of innovative, There are all kinds of innovative ideas about how to generate power at lower cost and so on. And you see, when you're on a panel with somebody like Dr. Kwabena Donko, you have to be careful because he sees with all the figures and so on. You understand? But you see, from where I sit, it is clear that so far now, if you take our energy mix, the cheapest is actually hydro. Because the last time I checked, hydro power, the unit cost is around 3 cents per whatever measure they use, 3 cents. Now, if you come to thermal generation, it's interesting. It can drop all the way above 20 cents, from 3 cents to beyond 20 cents per the same unit. Okay? So hydro is important. Now, I looked at Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's 7-year development plan. And Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's 7-year development plan spoke about mini hydro projects dotted around the country for purposes of irrigation, for agricultural development, and for power generation, and so on. Now, the mini hydro projects have been abandoned. Nobody is talking any longer about the mini hydro projects. 2 weeks ago, I drove to Sandama. And on the way, I saw the consequences of opening the Bagri Dam. What it does to people. I mean, if you drive along that route, it's obvious. The villages would get submerged underwater and so on. And I know that there has been an idea to build a new hydroelectric project somewhere there. Pardon?
Palugu,
fantastic. You know, to build a new hydro project there, which will stop the flooding, the devastation, the destruction of agriculture and so on, and give us water for irrigation to improve agriculture, and also give us power. What are we doing about that? What are we doing about that? You understand? There have been all kinds of theories about wave energy, and the champion of that was Kenneth Jackson. Kenneth Jackson came up with this theory about how we can even generate power just by utilizing the waves of the sea and so on. What happened to that? You know, so look, it's important for us to look at all of these alternatives, some of which are cheaper than thermal generation, to improve our energy mix, to bring down the prices, and also to help us to deal with this situation where we keep piling debt upon debt in the energy sector. But you see, above all of this, and this is a point which was made by a lawyer and by Dr. Kwabneji very strongly. I think we also made the same point. About, we know why this debt is ballooning. Because the cost of that sector is also the result of gross inefficiency and mismanagement. Okay? So you don't tax us to pay for the debt without taking measures to stop the accumulation of the useless debt. So as they say in French, it ought to be para passo. Is that how they say it? Para passo. So you may be introducing the tax, but at the same time, we ought to see measures which would cut the waste. And we ought to hold managers accountable for their irresponsible actions which lead to ballooning the debt and so on. So there are many people who would have had no problem with the imposition of this tax or this levy. But are saying that, look, we will pay forever. We are told, for example, about line losses. What is the major cost of line losses? Obsolete equipment. Obsolete equipment. For as long as we continue to operate with obsolete equipment and so on, line losses will continue to increase. You understand? Now recently, I was hearing of the proposal to privatize certain aspects of ECG's operations and so on. I'm saying, what the hell is wrong with us? We did that before with disastrous consequences. We brought in the Electricity Company of France. We privatized the collection of revenue, gave it to the Electricity Company of France, and it was a complete disaster. Why? We brought in Aqua Vitans Rand of South Africa, privatized aspects of the operations of the Ghana Water Company. It was a total disaster. So our leaders, are they not learning? And indeed, what makes them think that private companies have some magic which the state sector cannot have? What is it? Is it that those who manage the private companies went to a different school? They go to the same school as public sector managers. They learn the same things. Why can't they all apply the same things they all learn from the same school? And in any case, if it comes to the capacity to generate resources, the state and the private sector who has more capacity to generate resources.